Chapter 7. Monday morning. When Doreen woke up the next morning, her head felt heavy, her body achy. She wasn't sure what she'd done to deserve this, but it probably had to do with sleeping on her mattress on the floor. As she lay here, she remembered what today was. She bolted upright, bounced out of bed, and raced into the shower. Today, Scott, the antiques guy from Christie's, was coming with a crew to pack up her furniture. Out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, she remembered how she hadn't cleaned up the kitchen fully last night. As she glanced around her bedroom, she hadn't taken the time to clean up the mess in here either. She needed to do more before the movers could come in and pack up everything. Why the devil had yesterday been so busy? But of course it had been crazy between Alan's visit and then Penny's visit and last night's impromptu visit with Nan. Doreen hadn't had much time to herself all day. And Mac had come for dinner, and had made an absolutely wonderful meal for them. She wondered if she could sneak in some leftovers for breakfast, because she sure didn't have much time otherwise. She glanced at her watch and winced. It was already 9 a.m. She was seriously late. She quickly dressed, her hair brushed back in a ponytail with short tendrils flying loose around her head. She collected her dirty laundry, ran downstairs, and put on a load of wash so at least it was out of the way, and returned to her bedroom to straighten up as much as she could. She had so many of Nan's clothes yet to go through, and her bedroom was still filled with so much clutter. She made the bed, her pallet on the floor as best she could, and then went downstairs again. As she got to the bottom, she found Thaddeus sitting on his roost in the living room, staring at her wide-eyed. She walked over, reached out a hand, and he hopped onto it. She cuddled him up close, brushed the feathers on his chest and neck, and said, "Good morning, Thaddeus." "Good morning, Doreen," he cheered. She gasped. "When did you learn my name?" Doreen. She giggled, feeling inordinately pleased. "Well, finally," she said, "and I like you too." She dropped a kiss on the top of his head, and walked into the kitchen. She put on coffee first and foremost as Thaddeus worked his way up onto her shoulder, so he could sit on his preferred perch and watch as she worked. With the coffee on, she turned off the alarms on the security and walked into the living room, wondering how much she had to clean up before the moving men got here. Everything was so chaotic in the house presently, and Christie's would be taking out such big pieces that she knew the moving men would have to create a wide path, leaving behind a mess by the time they were done. With the minutes racing by, she filled the kitchen sink with hot soapy water and cleaned up the dishes from the previous night. She had told Mac it wasn't a big deal, but now that she'd overslept, she felt pressed for time. She knew it wouldn't matter to the appraiser if her dishes were done, but somehow it mattered to her. With that done and realizing she was doing this backward, she checked in the fridge for some food. Just a little bit of that pasta salad was left. She brought it out, looked at it, wondered if she should eat it straight from the fridge or at room temperature. She decided to heat it up a tad, and tossed it into the microwave for a couple minutes to take the chill off. Smiling, she then sat down with a cup of coffee, and ate the dinner leftovers from the night before. She worried Mac would be upset with her. Although she was pretty sure he wouldn't be, she wondered why she felt so distressed about the idea. Finally, she couldn't help herself. She took a picture, sent it to him, and texted him. "Leftovers for breakfast. Hope it's okay." Instead of texting her back, he phoned her. "Why wouldn't it be okay? You paid for it and you made it, and you barely got one meal's worth of it yourself," she explained. He sighed heavily. "We still have a long way to go with you, don't we?" She frowned at the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'll explain later," he said. "When is your appraiser coming?" "I don't know," she said, "and I slept late so I felt like I had to get some food down, then look at what else I need to do. I admit to feeling fairly stressed." "Don't panic. They're likely to be there for hours," he said. "Didn't they say they could be there a couple days?" "It's possible," she said. "It depends how much trouble they have. I'm sure the smaller pieces won't be an issue, but the bed and the couch. Well, I don't know. Aren't you supposed to look for the provenance stuff? She gasped. I forgot all about it. I gotta go. She hung up and ate as fast as she could, which was a damn shame because the food was so good. Finally, she slowed herself down and said, with Thaddeus staring at the tomato on her plate, I don't need to race through everything. Doreen. She looked at Thaddeus. What would you like, Thaddeus? But he'd already snatched a piece of green onion off the top of her plate and had run to the other side of the table with it. She smiled. Not sure you'll like that, she said. It does have a bit of a bite. Slowing herself a little more, she finished her plate at a more reasonable rate. Then she got up, tossed her plate and fork into the hot soapy water, and turned around to take care of feeding her 3 animals before cleaning the rest of the kitchen. Finally, she filled her coffee cup and took a deep breath. At least that should be clean enough. She checked her phone to realize the battery was almost dead. She'd forgotten to plug it in last night. Damn. She went upstairs and put it on its charger. In 10 minutes, she could get a decent amount of charge. What she didn't want was to have Scott Rawson call her and not receive his call. While she was here in her bedroom again, she took the opportunity to pick up more boxes for Goodwill and brought them down to the front stairs. She hadn't been able to take it all in her last trip there. She wasn't sure she'd gotten all of the items together for Wendy either. Doreen headed upstairs once more. Wendy. She frowned and glanced at her phone on the charger. You never called me back after I dropped off that last load on Friday. She wondered if she should give Wendy a call. Doreen understood she'd gotten there early at opening time, but Wendy was supposed to get back to her after going through the latest boxes of Nan's things. If Wendy couldn't sell some items, she would call Doreen to pick them up. And now, of course, it was early on a Monday, so not the best time to call Wendy either. Doreen frowned at that. Maybe your life is as crazy as mine is, she said. I don't know how people do it all. They have work. They have children, and yet still sometimes all this craziness piles in on top. She shook her head. I just have me to look after. At that, Muggs barked. She looked at him and grinned. And you, she said. He was on his back, lying on her mattress on the floor, all 4 feet in the air, content. She reached down and scrubbed his belly, and he just sighed with happiness. She chuckled. We should be doing more cleaning up in here. The moving men can't even maneuver around all this stuff. She figured she could clean out more clothes from the drawers and dressers. She still had boxes she hadn't had a chance to sort through yet. Frowning, she decided to move those boxes into the spare room, at least the stuff that had come out of the dressers and the vanity. She didn't want to rush the job of going through Nan's clothing, as there was money to be found. Who could forget Nan's habit of leaving money in her clothing? Still, Doreen needed to clear out some of the clutter in here. With that done, she heard vehicles outside. She looked out the front window, and sure enough, Scott was here. She ran down the stairs and opened the front door. She beamed up at him. Hey, I wasn't sure how early you would come. I tried to call earlier but the phone was busy, he explained, so I just came straight over. I hope that's okay. Her head bobbed a yes. Sure is. Come on in, please. I'm so terrified of things going wrong that I couldn't wait for you to come. It's been a very stressful weekend, she said. Scott chuckled. Well, we're here now, he said. She looked behind Scott to see the men with him. Oh good, you brought 4 men with you, she exclaimed. Yes, I figured it was probably easier to bring more men and see if we could get it all done today than stay in town and have just 2 of them. I'm amazed it would take that long actually, she said, because a moving truck and a couple guys could have it all out of here in an hour. The foreman just looked at her. She winced. I guess you have to take better care of these things than that? Scott nodded. Absolutely we do, he said. I'd get shot if we were to do a half-assed job. Besides, with a set like this, you know it's very special. I hear you, she said. I'm still looking for the paperwork though. I am hoping, maybe once you get the biggest pieces out, I will have a little more room to keep searching. We will get to work on that, he said. So you go off and do whatever you need to, and we apologize ahead of time if we'll be in your way. It's fine, she said, smiling. Let me rephrase that, I'm just happy you're here, so let me know if you need anything. And she turned and left them to the living room. Only she couldn't. She kept looking into the living room to see them gently removing drawers, packing up drawers, wrapping up legs of the coffee table, but not until after they'd taken a great deal of photographs of every angle and every side of the designated pieces. They worked in pairs of 2, one photographed, and then they wrapped, taped, and had the first pieces moved to the truck outside. Finally, Scott walked over to her. Are you curious or worried? Both, she said, chuckling. Curious because I didn't understand how much you would baby the furniture. But, when you wrapped up this furniture, then covered it in bubble wrap before placing it in padded blankets? I'm amazed, she said. While it was in your possession, he said, it's gently worn. But once it comes into our possession, he said, we don't want any more damage to occur. We'll get our restoration people to take a look at the pieces at the auction house too. Restoration? Some of the scratches can be easily fixed, he said. Some of the pieces might need oiling. Others might need a little bit of refinishing. You can try to sell them all as they are, or we can get them fixed up and then sell them after that. I can give you quotes on both. She nodded, her mind in turmoil. You know I'll go with the one that doesn't require money up front, don't you? She wrapped her arms around her chest, seeing her dreams of a big payday going out the window. But it figured nothing came free. Neither come with cash up front, Scott said with a shake of his head. We wouldn't do anything unnecessarily anyway. But you want to get top dollar for these pieces. And in this case, we'd give you a quote for the work, get the work done, and then sell the pieces. So the money required to pay for the work done would come out of the profit. Oh, she said. Well then, I'll wait and see the quotes. Good enough, he said. You'll get a decent amount for these pieces, he said, but if they're in better condition and if they look new and shiny, you'll get more. It's amazing how the public responds to the bright, shiny look. I understand, she said slowly. Just like anybody else, I'm more susceptible to something that looks shiny and new than something that looks old and beaten. Old and beaten is fine, and if it can be made shiny and at least look well maintained, that's a huge difference, he said. It can't ever be made new again. That's not what we're selling either. We're selling antiques, things that have lived and survived for a long time with wonderful care. Filling in a few scratches and giving it a coat of oil or buffing out some bigger scratches and putting on a stain that matches is not the same thing. But because of the age of the antiques, everything has to be matched, so that could be expensive. We wouldn't do that unless it was something you specifically wanted done. She shook her head. I wouldn't want anything that would decrease the value of the antiques, and it sounds like some of those would. Some methods used wood, yes, he said. I would definitely not go in that direction myself. One of the men called him. He walked over, and they huddled over a chair, looking at some marks on it. She chewed on her bottom lip, watching them, worrying about it. When they stepped back and continued taking photographs, she wondered if she could ask what was wrong, and then realized she would just slow the process. With this many men, they could get everything out of here today, and she needed that. She wanted these pieces to be in their hands, where they were responsible for keeping them safe. And for that to happen, she needed to back off and to let them do their thing. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and said to the animals, "Let's go outside, guys. We're in the way." Muggs hadn't settled down at all. He'd been wandering around the living room. He'd recognized Scott but wasn't so sure about the other men. One of the men didn't like dogs, and that had added its own difficulty. Some of her husband's cohorts hadn't liked pets, and she'd been required to keep Muggs away from her husband's office. Now she pulled out a leash because Muggs kept going back into the living room. She gave the leash a rattle and he came running. She hooked him up and called for Goliath, who just stared at her from the bottom step of the stairs, his tail twitching as if to say, "Yes, I'm here," and